We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Bob. This comes from Twitter. I am going to sneeze, Bob. I apologize in advance for
here
the
it
sneeze
comes.
that's going to happen in the middle of your question. Even though we've discussed the different amplifier classes before, Bob is still a little unclear on what actually sounds best. He has a friend who insists that Class A still sounds better than Class D, but Bob sees more and more Class D amps being used, and he knows that they're much more efficient. So putting efficiency aside, what actually sounds best? Class A, Class AB, Class D, Class H, Class I... There's a bunch of them.
So I saw an explanation that I really like because it's an easy analogy to picture.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, I want to hear it.
Yeah, Class A. Imagine that you have a tennis ball and you want to move the tennis ball from left to right, left to right, left to right. Class A is like having both of your hands on the tennis ball all the time. Whether the ball is moving, not moving, whatever it is, you got two hands on the ball all the time, moving it back and forth or holding it still. Class B, so just straight up Class B, would mean you have one hand on the ball, you move it to the center, and then you toss it over to the other hand, and then you move it, and then you toss it over to the other hand. So there's a moment there where there are no hands touching the ball in Class B. Class AB, you have the ball in one hand, and then you pass it to the other hand, and then you pass it back to the other hand. So there's never a moment when there are zero hands on the ball, but half the time, or a little less than half the time, there's only one hand on the ball, not like Class A where there's two hands on the ball all the time. So I really liked that for explaining Class A, Class B, and Class AB, because that gives you a good visualization of what's going on. You got these two outputs, one for the positive, one for the negative side of the sine wave. And Class A, it's both of them all the time. Class B, there's this moment in between where there's a switch over. And then Class AB, it's like a nice smooth transition back and forth. So I kind of like that visualization. Yeah.
Okay, so which one sounds best? The one that doesn't add any distortion, which
Right.
could be theoretically any of them. Your friend, who likes Class A, likes it because he has read from all of the magazines and stuff like that about how Class A was the best, and therefore he believes it, and it is true.
It is the most linear, and it doesn't care what the impedance of your speakers are. Doesn't care.
That is
It's just
true.
got two hands on the ball all the time, constantly in control.
Class B is not used in home theater.
Nah.
By itself. It's
Because there
used in
is that
broadcast.
moment of distortion in that switchover where
Right.
there's no hands on the ball. There is
So
a
the Class
distortion there.
AB is the
Standard.
hybrid. Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Well, it's a standard, but it's the hybrid. It's between Class A and Class B. You're not using all the power all the time, and you're not switching off anything so that there's
Right.
some distortion, which Class B gives you. It gives you the best sort of both worlds, and it really is the standard. Any one of these amplifier topologies, not B, but all the rest of them, D's or all the switching amps and all that stuff, they can all give you a perfectly linear response. And if they do, they don't have a sound. They don't have a sound. If they have a sound, that's distortion, and that's bad. So your friend who thinks that Class AB sounds best likes distortion. That's what it is. They like distortion. If they really truly have sat down and said, this amplifier sounds better than that amplifier, the only explanation is one of them is distorting. And if they take that A and compare it to everything else, either everything else is distorting and the Class A is the only one that's not adding a sound, or more likely, the Class A is distorting and the stuff they're comparing to is all very linear, and they like the distortion. That's if they actually did any test. More likely, it's just up in their head. They read it. It's true. So and so over at Stereophile said it. Therefore, it must be true.
So
which is garbage.
just to quickly explain Class D is a very different thing. Class D takes the analog sine wave signal and turns it into a square wave. And it does that at a very, very high frequency, usually at least 10 times the highest frequency. So if you're using 20 kilohertz, it would be at 200 kilohertz. That would normally be the minimum switching if you're talking about a full range Class D amplifier. It turns it into a square wave, and now the duration of high versus the duration of low, because a square wave is just either high or low, that is what becomes analogous to the up and down of the original sine wave. So then to turn it back into a sine wave, you apply a low pass or low pass filter. You apply a low pass filter to it that turns that square wave back into a sine wave. Now, to make that happen perfectly, the perfect translation, you would have to have a very steady impedance, because the signal is the voltage, the amplitude is the current. So if the impedance is changing, due to Ohm's law, you're going to have variances in the voltage and current if the impedance is variable. So the full system only works flawlessly if the impedance remains the same. Well, the impedance doesn't remain the same in an actual speaker across all the audible frequencies. It changes, in some speakers, it changes a lot from frequency to frequency, the impedance. And that can be the reason why Class D can start creating some distortion. If you try to use a full range Class D amplifier to power a speaker with lots of impedance swings, that can quite easily create distortion in a Class D amplifier. And we've seen this in the Class D amplifiers that are out there, particularly if they have low impedance at a high frequency. The only way to get around that is to use an even higher frequency to begin with. So now you're talking about a 2 megahertz frequency or something like that. And then have a more sophisticated low-pass filter with a lot of feedback and error correction circuitry to make sure that when the impedance changes, it all feeds back through and stays linear, and that starts getting expensive. So we see on the very good full-range Class D amplifiers like what Anthem makes or something like that, they're very expensive because they have a ton of feedback and error correction circuitry, and they're switching at an insanely high frequency to make that work. But then you think about, what if you're only using it for a limited range of low frequencies, right? All of a sudden, you don't need as high a frequency to begin with. It's this limited range, so the impedance swings probably aren't as large. That makes them perfect for subwoofers. That's why almost every subwoofer amplifier is a Class D amplifier. It's a limited range of low frequencies.
Since before you started looking at bash amps, all that stuff, man, it's been Class D for a real long time.
And it makes so much sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And this is where we've gotten into some issues in this podcast in the past, and my opinions in particular. The Bang & Olufsen ice amps were hugely popular for a while. They were like the hot thing. Everybody had them because Bang & Olufsen had put a ton of technology into putting together an amplifier, a Class D amplifier they called an ice amp, that was capable of fairly linear response, across the entire frequency range. And they were cheap. You could buy them, and you could buy them and modify them, and as long as you still said they were ice amp based on ice amps, Bang & Olufsen didn't care, which was great. But Bang & Olufsen is not looking for a perfectly linear frequency response in their speakers. They will straight up tell you that. They are looking for a target curve. So when they made their ice amps to be a good amp for them, didn't necessarily make them a good linear amp overall. This is my experience with them, because I've heard quite a few ice amps in my time, and I have noticed a tonal difference that is not insignificant from a standard Class A/B amplifier. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't really mean anything, to be honest with you. But what it does mean is that making a really good Class D amp that is completely on par with Class A/B amps and Class A amps is expensive. And if you're not buying something that's super expensive, you run the risk of something that's not perfectly linear. Class A, Class AB, and really expensive Class Ds should all sound exactly the same.
If they're perfectly designed, then they will, yeah.
If they're
perfectly, or not perfectly,
designed.
But well designed,
adequately designed most of the time. At this point, it's like saying, it's like, I don't know, I don't even want to get into another car analogy, but
yes,
it's like saying like a chair. It's like an adequately designed chair will keep you from falling down when you sit on it. Okay, that is what amplifier technology is these days. Not Class D ones that are trying to do something brand new, but Class A and Class AB amplifiers are chairs. They'll get you. it's a known thing. They can do this pretty well. Will some do it better with less heat and more of this, and you know, be able to be more efficient with their power and to handle very low ohms in loads like that? Yeah, absolutely. There's some differences there, but if they're not being pushed past their limits, they should all sound exactly the same.
Yeah. So basically, Class D responds less favorably to changes in impedance in the speaker
Right.
load. And that means it's more difficult to create a full range Class D amplifier that could handle any speaker you throw at it. A Class A amplifier doesn't care about the impedance of the speaker. It's going to stay linear no matter what. So that can be why audiophiles still prefer them. They're like, doesn't matter what speaker I attach to this, I know it remains linear. So there's that argument for it, but then they're way less efficient. So
Yeah.
that's the trade-off.
Right, and this is what makes me a little skeptical when somebody like Pioneer or somebody comes out and they have straight Class D amps in their in their receivers. I'm like, I don't think so, dude. You can't be competitive with the other receivers that are out there and have really super duper linear Class D amps. I don't know. It makes me skeptical. Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.